Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryankaravavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Vakratunda Mahakaya Surya Koti Samprabha Nirvignam Kuru Me Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada Saraswati Namastubhyam Varade Kamarupini Vidyarambham Karishyami Siddhir Bhavatu Me Sada Gurur Brahma Gurur Vishnu Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha Gurureva Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Hari Om teachers, I hope everyone had a great summer, and I want to welcome everyone back for another exciting and fruitful year. And I want to sincerely thank you all for your commitment again to teach, and for those of you that are new to teaching, welcome. Now, teaching is one of the best ways to grow. It presents challenges for us that will make us study more, reflect more, and be more. So today, I wanted to address one challenge that often comes up in the classroom, especially with our middle school and our high school. If you were to ask them, in terms of religion, how do you identify yourself? You will hear a very common response. They will quickly respond with, I'm an atheist. Yes, even our Balvihar students who have gone through years of our curriculum, you will still find them in the high school grades saying, I'm still an atheist. So, Shraddha and Vishwas is not their natural, inherent mental canvas. Faith is a very poor translation for Shraddha, because we automatically think and feel that faith means to follow blindly and to be unquestioning, and which essentially cages one's intellect. In fact, Sanatana Dharma glorifies the intellect as the hallmark of mankind, and it is that intellect that puts him above animals and even devatas. So on the other hand, when the students, especially who grew up here in the US, do apply their intellect to investigate, we get into a different problem. Western education teaches us ways of proof that is unfruitful for Vaidika studies. So, for example, in school, we learn to what I like to call prove through disproof. So let me take two examples. The first one is when a student is trying to gain their PhD. And writing those master's thesis statements has a particular pattern to it. My thesis has to find evidence that proves the incorrectness of past hypotheses. And that is called progress. The second example I'll take is our own students that join the debate team. Some of the structure that I wasn't part of a debate team, but I've Googled around to see how it's structured and what is asked of the students to develop the skill of argument. And one thing I noticed was they're asked to come up with one argument that supports their stance and two arguments that will poke holes in the opponent's logic. So again, this is a pattern of proof through disproof. But Vaidika studies needs a different angle of analysis. They need proof through experience. And what do I mean by this? We have to first presume that what the Shastras promise is true. Then we follow the logic that's given, we follow the techniques that are prescribed, and we actually apply ourselves to it and go through it. It is then that we come to experience the results of it, and then we have proved Shastra's validity through both reason and experience. This is what I like to call proof through experience. Now, this is not just my own concoction of ideas. There are two excerpts I'd like to read from Puja Gurudev's work that examine both this application of Eastern versus Western philosophy, and especially how to approach the Vaidika Shastras. Now, this excerpt I'm taking from the very introduction of Ishavasi Upanishad. It is not about the Upanishad itself, but it is the introduction he gives and how he draws the audience into the appropriate approach for study. So he said, before we enter the main textbook, it is certainly necessary that we should know some of the fundamental thoughts of the great rishis. Let us presume that religion has a great message to the world and that it is quite scientific. This is only a presumption. In our research, if we were to discover that this is not true, we shall declare to the world our findings. If, on the other hand, by sheer accident come to discover that in religion there is a scientific treatment of life and its values, let us then try to live those nobler values and come to declare to the world the real meaning of true religion. So here he's asking the audience to set aside any biases, whether it is for or against religion, give religion a chance to explain. He asks us to then test it out, then declare to the world what is the actual truth that is to be found. Very pragmatic approach in studying the Shastras. Now the second excerpt, Puja Gurudev compares the approach to philosophy, Western philosophers versus Eastern philosophers. Extrovert by nature, philosophy to the Westerner is to a great extent an objectified science. To them, philosophy points out a view of life. The ideal may and do often change with the result that we have a new ideal in the West almost every decade. In the East, philosophy means something more than attempt to show a view of life, for they were the most practical of men. They demanded that the ideas and ideals preached by the philosopher should be capable of being practiced. So every philosopher was compelled not only to paint a glorious picture of the ideal world, but also to give the topography and the route to it in all detail. Thus, to the East, philosophy was not only a view of life, but it was a way of life as well. The philosophy pointing out the view of life can certainly be scientific, but it would lack the technique. And science without a technique is a mere fable for children to read. With this point of view in mind, we try to investigate into the religions of the world. We shall find that of all the existing religions, Hinduism in its Vedantic philosophy supplies us not only with mere enumerations of enduring foundations upon which the peaceful world of progressive living can be organized, but also an eminently satisfactory line of argument to establish why those values are absolute and fundamental. So, the challenge in front of teachers in today's Balavihar classrooms is to first convince them to put down the tools of criticism. And what does criticism look like in their vocabulary? I'm an atheist. I believe in spirituality, but not religion. Prove it to me, then I'll believe it. This is the negative or rejection approach. We must instead convince them to pick up the tools of Shraddha and Vishwas. And what does this look like in their vocabulary? If it's true, then how does it work? How do I practice this? What do I gain by doing this? So this is the assertion approach or the positive approach. Now let's take that simple sentence. How is this possible? There's a tone in which I can say it that tells you whether it's that rejection approach or assertion approach. How is that even possible? Or how is that possible? So there's this subtlety between accepting the premise and trying to understand the logic versus demanding a logic to prove its efficacy. So this is the subtle shift we have to encourage in our students when they enter specifically Vaidika Sanatana Dharma philosophy. Now, when the teachers are approached with this challenge, it can be very difficult. It is very subtle. But really what goes on is when we as teachers are challenged like this, we actually come face to face with our own disbelief, our own lack of self-application, and therefore our own inexperiences with the truths. So I was on a flight and there was a stranger sitting next to me, and of course once you start getting to know them, I get typical questions. And one of them was, what made you take up this path, that too at such a young age? And he continued and he said, we usually take up religion only when, life hits the fan. And I was kind of being a smart aleck at that point. So I said, well, I was smart enough to learn from other people's mistakes. But in fact, this is pointing at something that is a fundamental truth in the evolution of man. And Puja Gurudev brings this to light in his book, Kindle Life. He says, it may reasonably be asked, why should man hunt after knowledge of great reality, of that great power that is behind the experienced world of senses? In fact, there is no institution called religion amongst animals. It is experienced only by man, and that too only a few. So this interesting state has been exhaustively dealt with in our own texts and shastras, and Puja Gurudev says that it has been vaguely hinted at by Darwin. Why? Because Darwin theory is what? That through every iteration of development that we graduate from a lower level to a higher level, from ape to man. But Puja Gurudev mockingly uses that analogy and says, but here again, obviously, there is a period of transition where we find that man has yet to grow up. There is an animalistic instinct in the form of man in his behavior. Therefore, even they are no better than animals, and even they don't need religion. So, lower forms of mentality where we indulge and live by instincts just as animals do, those type of humanity will never seek religion. They will reject religion as, why do I need this anyways? Puja Gurudev continues, but those who have undergone circumstances that are unpleasant or unwelcome have grown into beings better developed mentally and intellectually, and therefore challenging questions begin to pose to them. So such questions are, from where did all these things come from? Where do they go and why? Is there even a mission or purpose in life, or is life merely an accident? To these developed beings, religion has meaning and a purpose, and it shows the path and the goal. So, teachers are in a very unique position to catalyze this evolution in the students. Teachers have the opportunity to take the animalistic state they're in now and to make them into mature sadhakas. And we have the unique opportunity to help the students evolve early on in life so that they don't have to wait till life hits them to evolve. Now, what does it take to actually bring about this transformation in the students in the classroom? There are 8 points that I thought of when it comes to what the teachers need to be able to deliver in class to really uplift the student. First is they should be able to describe what it's like to live animalistically, especially in the modern form that the youth are influenced by, taught to be, and taught to live by. So we have to be able to show that with clarity. Then we also have to show them that it is actually a fruitless state, that they're actually not going to be able to achieve what they want through that kind of lifestyle. 3, they have to invoke through those 2 illustrations this need to search for that solution. And when that search becomes stronger and stronger, we should then offer and point out that religion does offer that solution better than science. We often fall into the trap of saying, see, religion is just like science and therefore religion is great. I'm saying let's take it one step beyond, because religion does start answering questions that science has not yet learned to ask. Therefore, point out that religion offers those solutions better than science. Now, in order to then approach that religion, we have to then combat the skepticism by reframing their approach to shastras. This is step 5. Reframing their approach. Again, changing that negative rejection approach into a assertion approach. Then, once they are in a mindset of Shraddha and Vishwas, now we are ready to give them step 6, which is to present thorough logic. the logic that is given in that particular syllabus that you are assigned to this year. And through those logics, we also have to support it by providing techniques of applications. This is step 7. And finally, there should be means of looking back at their own growth by reflecting. So these are the 8 things. 1, show them what animalistic lifestyle looks like in modern age. 2, show them that it is a fruitless chase. 3, show them that there is a need to search for a solution. 4, that religion offers that solution better than science. 5, combat that skepticism by reframing their approach to Shastra so that they develop a sense of Shraddha and Vishwas for the Shastra. 6 is to present thorough logic. 7, provide techniques of application. And 8, the means of looking back and seeing their own growth and reflecting on their progress. This is a lot to ask, but if these things are not covered, there will be hollowness in our lesson plans that we deliver, and the kids will immediately point it out. How do I do this? This is a lot to do. For this to come out naturally and effortlessly, we ourselves have to go through this. And this is not a short-term solution, but a long-term evolution. So in order to supplement and support this approach, we are going to be taking up the text called Art of Living as the main text for our sadhana during Teacher Satsang. So we'll begin with the very first chapter of Art of Living, where Puja Gurudev compares the difference between licentiousness and freedom. We take a look at humanity and see how far we've come in terms of our accomplishments. Puja Gurudev says, man has harnessed the phenomenal world. So we take any arena of development and we have made quite a lot of progress. The few things that come to my mind is exploration. We have reached the depths of the ocean as well the heights of space. We can explore down to the very bottom of the Marina Trench and explore the ecosystems that live there, as well as the other side of the moon, the dark side of the moon, Mars and beyond, with entire GPS satellite systems that we use on a day-to-day basis. And an even more prominent example is technology itself. Funnily, I saw a comparison between the last couple of generations. If you were to ask someone, what is the hand gesture to say you're picking up the phone? If you were my generation or older, we would probably do this. But in today's day and age, our students will instead do this. Why? Because the very phone itself has changed so much in the last 5-10 years. So these are just examples of how much we have come along in terms of our harvesting and harnessing powers. But Puja Gurudev tells us to look a little bit deeper. Even amongst that wealth, we still have the feelings of worry and dissatisfaction that seems to never go away. In fact, this has been an age-old problem that even the rishis of ancient times have also observed and studied. And they say that there is a simple reason behind this paradox. Even among wealth, we still feel worry and dissatisfaction. And what is this reason? Uncontrolled licentiousness leads to sorrow. Overindulgence in anything, extremes of anything, leads to destruction and sorrow. There's a very simple and classic example to see this. When we have a craving for sweets or dessert, right? We can have a little bit now, but if we overdo it, we will feel sorrow, both in one sitting and over the lifetime. So that one bucket of ice cream or that first doodh peda, whatever it is, the first time is fine. But if I kept going in that one sitting, the 5th bucket, the 7th box of laddus, I will feel sick to the stomach and will want to throw up, and that is the sorrow I feel. But let's say that I don't overdo it in the moment, but I overdo it over my lifetime. Every meal I have to have a sweet, and I will indulge in it again and again and again. Where will that lead to? The warning from the doctor saying, please give up sweets. You will develop diabetes. If not, you already have diabetes. So this is a simple example to show that uncontrolled indulgence will always lead to sorrow. So what is the solution for this? The rishis will say, please maintain control, have some discipline. But as soon as we hear the word discipline, we will react and revolt naturally. And one problem we make is we take the word discipline and associate it with religion and say this is all religion tells us to do. To be controlled and unexpressing, not experiencing life at all. If you can't live life if you follow religion. This is an erroneous extrapolation of the very definition of religion. And we'll further expand on this idea later. But coming back to this, where does freedom actually lie? How can we build freedom? How can we have freedom? So Puja Gurudev says, freedom is essentially built on intelligent self-restraint. And here, that adjective is very important. Intelligent self-restraint. And he gives a very simple example again. Our experience in driving on the road. I have all the freedom in the world to take any car I want, take any destination I want, and any route to get there. But if I don't do it in a controlled fashion, it will lead to death and destruction, both for myself and the community outside. Especially, as soon as I read this example, the first thought that came to my mind was the movie Fast and Furious, Tokyo Drift, right? The entire premise of that entire movie series is based on how far can I push the limits of discipline and control on the road and still stay alive. So we know where that adrenaline junkie live off of. The edge of staying safe and not experiencing sorrow, but pushing the boundaries, the limits of discipline as much as possible. So if I do not adhere to the laws and regulations of driving on the road, especially in the US, I have to drive on the right side, not the left side. A stop means a stop, not a rolling stop. And who's there to check all of our behaviors on the road? The cops themselves. They keep us in line so that when we adhere to the rules, there is safety for all, and therefore we have the freedom to reach the destinations without any worry. So this is a very interesting relationship between discipline and freedom. So the root cause of sorrow is the inability to distinguish between freedom versus indulgence. Hence, there is an aversion to religion. So scriptures actually become the manual for man-machine. This is the phrase that Puja Gurudev uses. Any complicated device you order from Amazon always comes in the box with a manual. Man himself, the humankind, especially with that unique skill or unique equipment called intellect, has to come with a manual. So the Shastras become the ways of understanding the necessity of voluntary, intelligent self-restraint. So humankind has been given the ability for maximum happiness only by following and harnessing the instructions. Otherwise, we will suffer the sorrows. This choice is up to us. This reminds me of the verse in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, where Bhagavan says that Brahmaji created humankind with the ability called karma yoga, or the spirit of yajna. And with this ability, I can attain kamaduk, the very desire-fulfilling cow. It is a metaphor, a poetic way of saying that I have been given all the abilities to accomplish and gain whatever I desire, but it is through intelligent self-application, intelligent self-restraint that will actually allow me to reach there. So the scriptures are an exhaustive science of better living, a complete technique of self-development so that I can experience that supreme state. So indulgence is actually not true freedom. Indulgence will lead to disaster. But on the other hand, when we adhere to the laws of nature and recognize the rights of others, this will inevitably lead to prosperity and peace. And Puja Gurudev takes 2 examples here to re-emphasize this thought. The constitution in any given country is meant to do exactly that, to establish freedom. How? By giving rules. That there's rules to prevent me or my neighbors or the whole people as a collective from doing whatever it is that we like. There are rules and regulations to keep us in line so that we adhere to the laws of nature and recognize the rights of others. So, in a way, the Shastras that prescribe the dharmic way of living became the constitution of our culture and tradition. Now, another example he takes is the art of right conduct, using electricity. We have all the freedom in the world to use electricity in whatever way we want. We can plug in our AC unit, we can plug in lights, we can plug in TV, we can plug in our phone. There's so many things that electricity fuels and enlivens. But it is only through right contact that we actually benefit from the usage of electricity. If I do not have the right contact, meaning I take my finger and I stick it in the socket and said, I'm going to have the right contact with electricity, what's going to happen? I'm going to get electrocuted and I will be destroyed. I will experience the ultimate sorrow. So the art of right conduct means that I am practicing self-regulation and adherence to an intelligent, voluntary self-restriction so that I may experience the freedom of use. So in the same way, religion prescribes rules to live by with the right contact with the world of objects, people, and phenomenons in the world. Now, when we hear this, there's another complaint that comes all too often. The world is full of evils and imperfections. How is it possible that I'm able to find peace and harmony in all of this corrupt world? How is that to be found? Now, Puja Gurudev has a really interesting rebuttal to this. He takes the analogy. He says, rough surfaces, as a rule, is essential for sharpening any dull instrument. A rough surface, by necessity, is required to shape up any dull instrument. It is the angle of application. So, in the same way, evils of the world is actually not the greatest problem. But the man's lack of dexterity in facing those challenges is the real problem. This reminds me of the Bhagavad Gita verse, Yada yada hi dharmasya, that whenever there is a decline, I will come take avatara to uplift dharma once more. So whenever there's a decline, this is Bhagwan Krishna saying during Mahabharata time, and that too he's referring to his entire past where he's also taken avatars. What does that mean? That this evil and corruption of this world has always been there, will always be there. How many times has he come down to help us? So even though evils will already be there, that is not the greatest problem. It is growth in struggle that becomes the growth. It is that right application. It is the using of the rough surfaces with that right angle to make the most of it. So, we cannot complain about the evils and imperfections within myself, because on a daily basis, I have a battle within me. So I cannot complain about why am I not perfect? Why am I always like this? No. We can't complain about the imperfections in our family. We cannot complain about the imperfections in the community. We cannot, of course, complain about the imperfections in the nation, no matter how much it is. At all levels, the greatest problem is not the imperfection. The greatest problem is a man's lack of dexterity in facing those challenges. So, without this perspective or point of view, we are constantly complaining about the problems of the world and we're unintelligently mourning. Our happiness then has to come from the right kind of analysis. So you've heard the classic example of a cup that is filled with water halfway. I can either look at the cup as half full or half empty. And if I'm always focused on there's so much more to take, there's so much more to fill in, there's more that I don't have, it is a pessimistic viewpoint. Whereas if we have the gratitude to appreciate what we already have, that is an optimistic or grateful mindset, and it makes all the difference in the world in approaching any challenge that is facing us. So Puja Gurudev says this unintelligent mourning can be seen in this sequence of people. The one who is in the wheelchair without legs will mourn after legs by watching someone walk by. The one who is walking will mourn after the one that's on a scooter or a bike. The one that's on the scooter or bike will mourn after the one that has a really fancy car. And the one who has the car will always complain about taxes. So this pessimistic way of looking at life will be unfruitful. It will not allow us to grow. Instead, Puja Gurudev recommends, let us develop gratitude for what we have. Let us not waste energy in unintelligent mourning. Let us conserve it and apply it to something better. So now, what is this better that we're looking at? We want to look at the very nature of mankind. We go back to the ultimate statement in our Shastras where it declares that man is essentially divine by nature and independence itself. But we don't have this experience because we're always caught by this cravings. The objects present to us are flashy and glittery, and they promise us these moments of joy. And we have a hard time resisting this call, and it's very hard to pull back from it. As a result, we're like the feathers that are being blown around by the wind. We're like that unmanned, neglected boat that is swaying in this ocean that is constantly agitated. Now, there's some imagery that comes to mind when I read such description, especially when they talk about objects have this glittery flare that keeps us attracted. It reminds me of this image of a monkey that reached into a box, and the size of the hole in that box is just enough the size of his hand. And why does he reach into the box? Because there is sweets and sugars inside. So especially, let's say jaggery or something. So the monkey reaches inside, he can get in really easily, grabs the jaggery and tries to pull out. But what happens? If the hole is like this, the hand can easily slip in, but once you grab that sugar, he can't get out. How does he get free? He's not free now. The only way to become free from this trap is to let go, and then he can come back out. So in the same way, we foolishly think that the joys and sweetness of life is in going after the objects. But when we try to grab it, it catches us in a dependent joy. And that dependency of objects, meaning that dependency of needing to experience joy through that object, keeps me bound to this world. So what does the Shastra say? Let these small happiness go, because there is a greater, more permanent state of happiness that is yet to be experienced. Resist the urge of the sweetness in that glittery object, so that you may eventually experience that greater, more ultimate independence itself. When Puja Gurudev said, to resist the call of the senses is extremely difficult, it reminds me of a verse that was beautifully said in Vivekachudamani. There, it describes how sense objects are a trap and it keeps man bound. And the analogy is, the deer, the elephant, the moth, and the fish, and the honeybee. These are 5 that are annihilated because of their slavery to one or the other senses, such as sound, etc., through their own attachments. But what then is the condition of a man who is attached to all 5? What is being said here in this verse? That if we look at each of those animals, a deer is entrapped by sound. It is the hunter that uses a certain sound to attract the attention of the deer, and that hunter is able to catch and kill that deer. Then, when it comes to Then for elephants, especially during the mating season, the sense of touch becomes a weak point. The hunters usually trap a female elephant to one tree, create a hole in the ground and cover it, and therefore the male elephant cannot resist needing contact with that female elephant and will come running towards that trap. And what happens to it? It falls in the ground and the hunter has captured it. And in the same way, there are 5 different animals that are entrapped and entangled by at least one sense. And that final statement, what then is the condition of man who is attached to all 5? We are constantly rearranging our environment so that it may suit the things that we like to hear, like to see, like to smell, like to taste, and like to touch. So what then is the condition of a human being who is struggling against the temptations of all 5 senses? So we are helpless like that feather in the wind. We are helpless like that unmanned boat in the treacherous waves of the ocean. But the ability to resist is the privilege and glory of man. No animal under their own free will try to evolve out of their own instincts. They are helpless to Prakriti that created them. But because man has been created with that powerful capacity called the intellect, we're able to reflect on our own tendencies, understand higher ways of living, and have the ability to pull ourselves out of our own indulgences. This ability alone is the privilege of mankind. So then, using this, how can we regain this experience of our own true nature, which is independence, to reach the shores of permanence? Now, Puja Gurudev takes an example here. He says, just like we must take to the methods by which mariners also find the shores. What do? Someone out on the ocean who is lost will then turn towards their compass or the North Star. The mariner trusts the accuracy of the compass to indicate the right direction. So in the same way, we must trust the Shastras to indicate the right direction, and with faith and devotion to those scriptures until we experience and actually attain that higher state. So this is again that premise that we must start with Shraddha and Vishwas, trust in that compass, then follow it until we come to the shores of the results, and therefore we can turn back and say, yes, this is true, this is the proof. Only after reaching the shores can we be sure that the compass is actually true and to be trusted. So there has already been thousands of generations of Mahatmas and Rishis who have applied themselves and have reached that state to then come back into the society around us and tell us, yes, it is true, yes, it can be attained, and that is the entire Guru Shishya Parampara that has been passed down to us. So, what does that state of higher look like? It is a calm, unmoved, it is to be calm and unmoved by the environment around us. Now, when we hear that statement, a Mahatma is calm and unmoved by nothing, what do we think of? This Mahatma in Samadhi who is still and unmoving. This often gets misinterpreted as an inert state, an inactive state. And critics take that into an erroneous extrapolation, saying that this is why Hinduism doesn't care about materialism. This is why Hindus in India is in an impoverished state and condition. It is their philosophy that leads to weakness. Now, I don't say this frivolously, because there have been many works that have been published that say very much this. This is some ideas that are inbuilt into the very textbooks that our students read in school. So we have to be highly aware of where these criticisms come and how corrupt they are on some nuggets of observations of our tradition and culture. So here, this is not true. When we say calm and unmoved, it is not a weakness, but it is a strength. Puja Gurudev further expands on this idea, saying that Emotions and sympathy is a virtue, but emotionalism ruins one's poise, balance, and progress. Sentiments adorn a person, but sentimentalism is an ugly scar on a personality. So what is he saying here? That let that emotion or compassion not go away. We're not going to turn into inert stones that don't feel anything. In fact, feeling compassion is the hallmark of a Jivan Mukta or guru that comes. It is because of their compassion that they're even interacting with us. So it is not that they don't feel anything, but they don't let it become overwhelmed, don't overwhelm their mind and consume them. Now, I thought about this. Is this true? Have we gone through such an experience? And then I remember that especially difficult experiences that a family can go through, especially when a family has a member who has been hospitalized. Look at the state of the family at that point. It is very hard. It is very emotional. But for the family to get through it, there's usually one or two people that kind of hold the ground, are the anchors for that family, and we should look to them to see what's going on. They are there in the hospital, they are there with the family because they care. They want to make sure everything goes well, that they are doing the best they can and solve whatever it is that needs to be solved, offer help as much as they can. That is not a lack of emotion, that is the very sign of the presence of emotion. But at the same time, they're not overcome with grief, they're not overcome with panic, they're not overcome with sorrow. They are still able to maintain poise, dignity, stability, and strength in that moment so that they are able to offer a solution. Now, can we put our hands on our hip and say, oh, what kind of, your stability means you don't have compassion, you're like an inert stone, this is why you can't function in this family? Isn't that a false criticism? So you can have emotions, you can have empathy, you can have sympathy, but don't let that sorrow overcome you. Maintain that stability and calmness because it is that which gives strength to solve in that challenge. So in the same way, the secret to success in life is to keep our head above the storms of our emotions. Discrimination should never become clouded by the rising tides of emotions, and our ancient rishis were exactly that. Our ancient rishis were such mighty stalwarts who stood amongst the life storms as firm as the great Himalayas. Their emotions or sentiments made their hearts bleed for the suffering of humanity, but their heads remained above the clouds in an ever peaceful realm of the highest ideal. Our own Puja Gurudev demonstrated this so clearly. It was in one of his letters that really exemplified this ability to have utmost compassion and at the same time stability to offer solution for humanity. And one of the letters that was written to him was an audacious, arrogant bhakta who criticized Puja Gurudev. He said, a sannyasi's only work is to be in samadhi. He must remain in his humble kutia. Why do you come to the towns and cities? Go back to your kutia in the Himalayas. What an accusation. But Puja Gurudev handles this with grace. He says, Priya Atman, immortal self. To send them back to their kutiyas, there is only one method. Be thyself perfect. Get out of the samsaric mire. Wipe your face clean. Spread cheerful smiles of joy where today there are ugly tears of sorrow. And the Mahatmas will go back to the kutiya, but not until then. Yet, sympathetically understanding the general import of your letter, Chinmaya answers your doubt. A sannyasi among the masses trying to bless the generations through seva is doing only a fraction of what he could bring about by the spiritual waves of divine influence generated during his hours of meditation. Yet, Priya Saumya, the sadhu in meditation is only one part of the whole. The ulcerated world has to be taught how to empower their seriously affected heads and hearts to to the curative spiritual rays of the Himalayas. This exclusive job of the specialists, the sannyasis. Chinmaya is down amongst you only to help you, to serve you, to save you. Once you have learned the art of living, the inner life of perfection, you shall become the powerful receiver of that you already are. Then Chinmaya shall go back to meditation and pray for the samsarins and samsara. This comes in Vedanta through letters. So in Puja Gurudev's own words, he is showing us how their work of a sannyasi among us in samsara is purely out of their emotions and compassion for us. It makes their hearts bleed for the suffering of humanity. And yet they have the strength, calmness, and stability to always keep their eyes on the highest, as high as the Himalayan ideals. So this is the strength of calmness and detachment from the waves of samsara itself. So our sadhana here, as Puja Gurudev concludes in this last section of Art of Living, in this particular chapter, our sadhana is to become dedicated to an accepted, well-listed ideal, to develop the courage to live on that conviction. So again, this combination of dedication to an ideal and an intellectual honesty is what it takes. And I like this phrase, develop the courage to live on that conviction. That is true honesty. Honesty is not just saying facts. Honesty is living what you believe, and your belief should be on those that are well accepted ideals. And what will we gain by living this? The result is a serene cadence in our life, and we add to the community, and we help build the glory and effectiveness of any nation that we live in. So this is the art of living. So with that, we shall conclude today's satsang. But before you leave, I'd like to propose 3 questions for reflection. So in whatever time is remaining today or throughout this week, please take some time to reflect on these 3 questions and write for yourself in your notebook the answers to these questions. Make note of the questions you receive from students in your classroom. Reflect on the very nature of those questions. Do they indicate a rejection approach, a negative approach, the approach where there's an attitude of saying, prove it to me and then I'll believe it? Or do those questions by nature a more assertion approach, where they're inquisitive in asking, how does it work? How can I practice this? What will I gain? In a positive way. Puja Gurudev talked about the evolution of a human's intellect, that we go from an animalistic lifestyle to a more mature sadhaka. How can the 3 gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, provide a good framework to mark the progress of evolution in oneself? In my own syllabus, in the concepts that I have to teach, which concepts am I the weakest in my own belief of it, in my own self-application of it, and my own experience of it? Which is the weakest concept in my own experience? Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.